Patricia Maclachlan. Sarah, plain and tall. 1. Did Mama sing every day? Asked Caleb. Every single day? He sat close to the fire, his chin in his hand. It was dusk, and the dogs lay beside him on the warm hearthstones. Every single day, I told him, for the 2nd time this week. For the 20th time this month. The 100th time this year? And the past few years? And did Papa sing, too? Yes. Papa sang, too. Don't get so close, Caleb. You'll heat up. He pushed his chair back. It made a hollow scraping sound on the hearthstones, and the dog stirred. Lottie, small and black, wagged her tail and lifted her head. Nick slept on. I turned the bread dough over and over on the marble slab on the kitchen table. Well, Papa doesn't sing anymore, said Caleb very softly. A log broke apart and crackled in the fireplace. He looked up at me. What did I look like when I was born? You didn't have any clothes on, I told him. I know that, he said. You looked like this. I held the bread dough up in a round pale ball. I had hair, said Caleb seriously. Not enough to talk about, I said. And she named me Caleb, he went on, filling in the old familiar story. I would have named you Troublesome, I said, making Caleb smile. And Mama handed me to you in the yellow blanket and said. He waited for me to finish the story. And said. I sighed. And Mama said, Isn't he beautiful, Anna? And I was, Caleb finished. Caleb thought the story was over, and I didn't tell him what I had really thought. He was homely and plain, and he had a terrible holler and a horrid smell. But these were not the worst of him. Mama died the next morn ing. That was the worst thing about Caleb. Isn't he beautiful, Anna? Her last words to me. I had gone to bed thinking how wretched he looked. And I forgot to say good night. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the window. Outside, the prairie reached out and touched the places where the sky came down. Though winter was nearly over. There were patches of snow and ice everywhere. I looked at the long dirt road that crawled across the plains, remembering the morning that Mama had died, cruel and sunny. They had come for her in a wagon and taken her away to be buried. And then the cousins and aunts and uncles had come and tried to fill up the house. But they couldn't. Slowly, one by one, they left. And then the days seemed long and dark like winter days, even though it wasn't winter. And Papa didn't sing. Isn't be beautiful, Anna? No, Mama. It was hard to think of Caleb as beautiful. It took 3 whole days for me to love him, sitting in the chair by the fire, Papa washing up the supper dishes, Caleb's tiny hand brushing my cheek. And a smile. It was the smile, I know. Can you remember her songs? Asked Caleb. Mama's songs? I turned from the window. No. Only that she sang about flowers and birds. Sometimes about the moon at nighttime. Caleb reached down and touched Lottie's head. Maybe, he said, his voice low, if you remember the songs, then I might remember her, too. My eyes widened and tears came. Then the door opened and wind blew in with Papa, and I went to stir the stew. Papa put his arms around me and put his nose in my hair. Nice soapy smell, that stew, he said. I laughed. That's my hair. Caleb came over and threw his arms around Papa's neck and hung down as Papa swung him back and forth, and the dog sat up. Cold in town, said Papa. And Jack was feisty. Jack was Papa's horse that he'd raised from a colt. Rascal, murmured Papa, smiling. Because no matter what Jack did, Papa loved him. I spooned up the stew and lighted the oil lamp, and we ate with the dogs crowding under the table, hoping for spills or handouts. Papa might not have told us about Sarah that night if Caleb hadn't asked him the question. After the dishes were cleared and washed and Papa was filling the tin pail with ashes, Caleb spoke up. It wasn't a question, really. You don't sing anymore, he said. He said it harshly. Not because he meant to, but because he had been thinking of it for so long. Why? He asked more gently. Slowly Papa straightened up. There was a long silence, and the dogs looked up, wondering at it. I've forgotten the old songs, said Papa quietly. He sat down. But maybe there's a way to remember them. He looked up at us. How? Asked Caleb eagerly. Papa leaned back in the chair. I've placed an advertisement in the newspapers. For help. You mean a housekeeper? I asked, surprised. Caleb and I looked at each other and burst out laughing, remembering Hilly, our old housekeeper. She was round and slow and shuffling. She snored in a high whistle at night, like a tea kettle, and let the fire go out. No, said Papa slowly. Not a housekeeper. He paused. A wife. Caleb stared at Papa. A wife. You mean a mother? Nick slid his face onto Papa's lap and Papa stroked his ears. That, too, said Papa. Like Maggie. Matthew, our neighbor to the south, had written to ask for a wife and mother for his children. And Maggie had come from Tennessee. Her hair was the color of turnips and she laughed. Papa reached into his pocket and unfolded a letter written on white paper. And I have received an answer. Papa read to us. Dear Mr. Jacob Whitting, I am Sarah Wheaton from Maine, as you will see from my letter. I am answering your advertisement. I have never been married, though I have been asked. I have lived with an older brother, William, who is about to be married. His wife-to-be is young and energetic. I have always loved to live by the sea, but at this time I feel a move is necessary. And the truth is, the sea is as far east as I can go. My choice, as you can see, is limited. This should not be taken as an insult. I am strong and I work hard and I am willing to travel. But I am not mild-mannered. If you should still care to write, I would be interested in your children and about where you live. And you. Very truly yours, Sarah Elizabeth Wheaton. P.S. Do you have opinions on cats? I have one. No one spoke when Papa finished the letter. He kept looking at it in his hands, reading it over to himself. Finally, I turned my head a bit to sneak a look at Caleb. He was smiling. I smiled too. One thing, I said in the quiet of the room. What's that? Asked Papa, looking up. I put my arm around Caleb. Ask her if she sings, I said. 2. Caleb and Papa and I wrote letters to Sarah, and before the ice and snow had melted from the fields, we all received answers. Mine came first. Dear Anna, yes, I can braid hair and I can make stew and bake bread, though I prefer to build bookshelves and paint. My favorite colors are the colors of the sea, blue and gray and green, depending on the weather. My brother William is a ILS fisherman, and he tells me that when he is in the middle of a fog-bound sea the water is a color for which there is no name. He catches flounder and sea bass and bluefish. Unless sometimes he sees whales. And birds, too. I, of course. I am enclosing a book of sea birds so you will see what William and I see every day. Very truly yours, Sarah Elizabeth Wheaton. Caleb read and read the letter so many times that the ink began to run and the folds tore. He read the book about sea birds over and over. Do you think she'll come? Asked Caleb. And will she stay? What if she thinks we are loud and pesky? You are loud and pesky, I told him. But I was worried, too. Sarah loved the sea, I could tell. Maybe she wouldn't leave there after all to come where there were fields and grass and sky and not much else. What if she comes and doesn't like our house? Caleb asked. I told her it was small. Maybe I shouldn't have told her it was small. Hush, Caleb. Hush. Caleb's letter came soon after, with a picture of a cat drawn on the envelope. Dear Caleb, My cat's name is Seal because she is gray like the seals that swim offshore in Maine. She is glad that Lottie and Nick send their greetings. She likes dogs most of the time. She says their footprints are much larger than hers, which she is enclosing in return. Your house sounds lovely, even though it is far out in the country with no close neighbors. My house is tall and the shingles are gray because of the salt from the BC. There are roses nearby. Yes, I do like small rooms sometimes. Yes, I can keep a fire going at night. I do. Why not know if I snore? Seal has never told me. Very truly yours, Sarah Elizabeth. Did you really ask her about fires and snoring? I asked, amazed. I wished to know, Caleb said. He kept the letter with him, reading it in the barn and in the fields and by the cow pond. And always in bed at night. One morning, early, Papa and Caleb and I were cleaning out the horse stalls and putting down new bedding. Papa stopped suddenly and leaned on his pitchfork. Sarah has said she will come for a month's time if we wish her to, he said, his voice loud in the dark barn. To see how it is. Just to see. Caleb stood by the stall door and folded his arms across his chest. I think, he began. Then, I think, he said slowly, that it would be good to say yes, he finished in a rush. Papa looked at me. I say yes, I told him, grinning. Yes, said Papa. Then yes it is, big. And the three of us, all smiling, went to work again. The next day Papa went to town to mail his letter to Sarah. It was rainy for days, and the clouds followed. The house was cool and damp and quiet. Once I sat 4 places at the table, then caught myself and put the extra plate away. 3 lambs were born, one with a black face. And then Papa's letter came. It was very short. Dear Jacob, I will come by train. I will wear a yellow bonnet. I am plain and tall. Sarah. What's that? Asked Caleb excitedly, peering over Papa's shoulder. He pointed. There, written at the bottom of the letter. Papa read it to himself. Then he smiled, holding up the letter for us to see. Tell them I sing was all it said. 3. Sarah came in the spring. She came through green grass fields that bloomed with Indian paintbrush, red and orange, and blue-eyed grass. Papa got up early for the long day's trip to the train and back. He brushed his hair so slick and shiny that Caleb laughed. He wore a clean blue shirt and a belt instead of suspenders. He fed and watered the horses, talking to them as he hitched them up to the wagon. Old Bess, calm and kind, Jack, wild-eyed, reaching over to nip Bess on the neck. Clear day, Bess, said Papa, rubbing her nose. Settle down, Jack. He leaned his head on Jack. And then Papa drove off along the dirt road to fetch Sarah. Papa's new wife. Maybe our new mother. Gophers ran back and forth across the road, stopping to stand up and watch the wagon. Far off in a field a woodchuck ate and listened. Caleb and I did our chores without talk ing. We shoveled out the stalls and laid down new hay. We fed the sheep. We swept and straightened and carried wood and water. And then our chores were done. Caleb pulled on my shirt. Is my face clean? He asked. Can my face be too clean? He looked alarmed. No, your face is clean but not too clean, I said. Caleb slipped his hand into mine as we stood on the porch, watching the road. He was afraid. Will she be nice? He asked. Like Maggie? Sarah will be nice, I told him. How far away is Maine? He asked. You know how far. Far away, by the sea. Will Sarah bring some sea? He asked. No, you cannot bring the sea. The sheep ran in the field, and far off the cows moved slowly to the pond, like turtles. Will she like us? Asked Caleb very softly. I watched a marsh hawk wheel down behind the barn. He looked up at me. Of course she will like us. He answered his own question. We are nice, he added, making me smile. We waited and watched. I rocked on the porch and Caleb rolled a marble on the wood floor. Back and forth. Back and forth. The marble was blue. We saw the dust from the wagon first, ing above the road, above the heads of Jack and old Bess. Caleb climbed up onto the porch roof and shaded his eyes. A bonnet, he cried. I see a yellow bonnet. The dogs came out from under the porch, ears up, their eyes on the cloud of dust ing Sarah. The wagon passed the fenced field, and the cows and sheep looked up, too. It rounded the windmill and the barn and the windbreak of Russian olive that Mama had planted long ago. Nick began to bark, then Lottie, and the wagon clattered into the yard and stopped by the steps. Hush, said Papa to the dogs. And it was quiet. Sarah stepped down from the wagon, a cloth bag in her hand. She reached up and took off her yellow bonnet, smoothing back her brown hair into a bun. She was plain and tall. Did you bring some sea? Cried Caleb beside me. Something from the sea, said Sarah, smiling. And me. She turned and lifted a black case from the wagon. And Seal, too. Carefully she opened the case, and Seal, gray with white feet, stepped out. Lottie lay down, her head on her paws, staring. Nick leaned down to sniff. Then he lay down, too. The cat will be good in the barn, said Papa. 4 mice. Sarah smiled. She will be good in the house, too. Sarah took Caleb's hand, then mine. Her hands were large and rough. She gave Caleb a shelly moon snail, she called it, that was curled and smelled of salt. The gulls fly high and drop the shells on the rocks below, she told Caleb. When the shell is broken, they eat what is inside. That is very smart, said Caleb. For you, Anna, said Sarah, a sea stone. And she gave me the smoothest and whitest stone I had ever seen. The sea washes over and around the stone, rolling it until it is round and perfect. That is very smart, too, said Caleb. He looked up at Sarah. We do not have the sea here. Sarah turned and looked out over the plains. No, she said. There is no sea here. But the land rolls a little like the sea. My father did not see her look, but I did. And I knew that Caleb had seen it, too. Sarah was not smiling. Sarah was already lonely. In a month's time the preacher might come to marry Sarah and Papa. And a month was a long time. Time enough for her to change her mind and leave us. Papa took Sarah's bags inside, where her room was ready with a quilt on the bed and blue flax dried in a vase on the night table. Seal stretched and made a small cat sound. I watched her circle the dogs and sniff the air. Caleb came out and stood beside me. When will we sing? He whispered. I shook my head, turning the white stone over and over in my hand. I wished every thing was as perfect as the stone. I wished that Papa and Caleb and I were perfect for Sarah. I wished we had a sea of our own. Sudden sound of hail, like stones tossed against the barn. We stared out the window, watching the ice marbles bounce on the ground. And when it was over we opened the barn door and walked out into the early morning light. The hail crunched and melted beneath our feet. It was white and gleaming for as far as we looked, like sun on glass. Like the sea. 9. It was very quiet. The dogs leaned down to eat the hailstones. Seal stepped around them and leaped up on the fence to groom herself. A tree had blown over near the cow pond. And the wild roses were scattered on the ground, as if a wedding had come and gone there. I'm glad I saved an armful, was all that Sarah said. Only one field was badly damaged, and Sarah and Papa hitched up the horses and plowed and replanted during the next 2 days. The roof had held. I told you I know about roofs, Sarah told Papa, making him smile. Papa kept his promise to Sarah. When the work was done, he took her out into the fields, Papa riding Jack, who was sly, and Sarah riding Old Bess. Sarah was quick to learn. Too quick, Caleb complained to me as we watched from the fence. He thought a moment. Maybe she'll fall off and have to stay here. Why? He asked, turning to me. Why does she have to go away alone? Hush up, Caleb, I said crossly. Hush up. I could get sick and make her stay here, said Caleb. No. We could tie her up. No. And Caleb began to cry, and I took him inside the barn where we could both cry. Papa and Sarah came to hitch the horses to the wagon so Sarah could practice driving. Papa didn't see Caleb's tears, and he sent him with an axe to begin chopping up the tree by the pond for firewood. I stood and watched Sarah, the reins in her hands, Papa next to her in the wagon. I could see Caleb standing by the pond, one hand shading his eyes, watching, too. I went into the safe darkness of the barn then, Sarah's chickens scuttling along behind me. Why? I asked out loud, echoing Caleb's question. The chickens watched me, their eyes small and bright. The next morning Sarah got up early and put on her blue dress. She took apples to the barn. She loaded a bundle of hay on the wagon for Old Bess and Jack. She put on her yellow bonnet. Remember Jack, said Papa. A strong hand. Yes, Jacob. Best to be home before dark, said Papa. Driving a wagon is hard if there's no full moon. Yes, Jacob. Sarah kissed us all, even my father, who looked surprised. Take care of Seal, she said to Caleb and me. And with a whisper to Old Bess and a stern word to Jack, Sarah climbed up in the wagon and drove away. Very good, murmured Papa as he watched. And after a while he turned and went out into the fields. Caleb and I watched Sarah from the porch. Caleb took my hand, and the dogs lay down beside us. It was sunny, and I remembered another time when a wagon had taken Mama away. It had been a day just like this day. And Mama had never come back. Seal jumped up to the porch, her feet making a small thump. Caleb leaned down and picked her up and walked inside. I took the broom and slowly swept the porch. Then I watered Sarah's plants. Caleb cleaned out the wood stove and carried the ashes to the barn, spilling them so that I had to sweep the porch again. I am loud and pesky, Caleb cried suddenly. You said so. And she has gone to buy a train ticket to go away. No, Caleb. She would tell us. The house is too small, said Caleb. That's what it is. The house is not too small, I said. I looked at Sarah's drawing of the fields pinned up on the wall next to the window. What is missing? I asked Caleb. You said you knew what was missing. Colors, said Caleb wearily. The colors of the sea. Outside, clouds moved into the sky and went away again. We took lunch to Papa, cheese and bread and lemonade. Caleb nudged me. Ask him. Ask Papa. What has Sarah gone to do? I asked. I don't know, said Papa. He squinted at me. Then he sighed and put one hand on Caleb's head, one on mine. Sarah is Sarah. She does things her way, you know. I know, said Caleb very softly. Papa picked up his shovel and put on his hat. Ask if she's coming back, whispered Caleb. Of course she's coming back, I said. Seal is here. But I would not ask the K's tie-in. I was afraid to hear the answer. We fed the sheep, and I set the table for dinner. 4 plates. The sun dropped low over the west fields. Lottie and Nick stood at the door, wagging their tails, asking for supper. Papa came to light the stove. And then it was dusk. Soon it would be dark. Caleb sat on the porch steps, turning his moon snail shell over and over in his hand. Seal brushed back and forth against him. Suddenly Lottie began to bark, and Nick jumped off the porch and ran down the road. Dust, cried Caleb. He climbed the porch and stood on the roof. Dust, and a yellow bonnet. Slowly the wagon came around the windmill and the barn and the windbreak and into the yard, the dogs jumping happily beside it. Hush, dogs, said Sarah. And Nick leaped up into the wagon to sit by Sarah. Papa took the reins and Sarah climbed down from the wagon. Caleb burst into tears. Seal was very worried, he cried. Sarah put her arms around him, and he wailed into her dress. And the house is too small, we thought. And I am loud and pesky. Sarah looked at Papa and me over Caleb's head. We thought you might be thinking of leaving us, I told her. Because you miss the because UMC. Sarah smiled. Lo no, she said. I will always miss my old home, but the truth of it is I would miss you more. Papa smiled at Sarah, then he bent quickly to unhitch the horses from the wagon. He led them to the barn for water. Sarah handed me a package. For Anna, she said. And Caleb. For all of us. The package was small, wrapped in brown paper with a rubber band around it. Very carefully I unwrapped it, Caleb peering closely. Inside were 3 colored pencils. Blue, said Caleb slowly, and gray. And green. Sarah nodded. Suddenly Caleb grinned. Papa, he called. Papa, come quickly. Sarah has brought the sea. We eat our night meal by candlelight, the 4 of us. Sarah Bas brought candles from town. And nasturtium seeds for her garden, and a book of songs to teach us. It is late, and Caleb is nearly sleeping by his plate and Sarah is smiling at my father. Soon there will be a wedding. Papa says that when the preacher asks if he will have Sarah for his wife, he will answer, Ayub. Autumn will come, then winter, cold with a wind that blows like the wind off the sea in Maine. There will be nests of curls to look for, and dried flowers all winter long. When there are storms, Papa will stretch a rope from the door to the barn so we will not be lost when we feed the sheep and the cows and Jack and old Bess. And Sarah's chickens, if they aren't living in the bouse. There will be Sarah's sea, blue and gray and green, banging on the wall. And songs, old ones and new. And Seal with yellow eyes. And there will be Sarah, plain and tall. Sarah, plain and tall. 30th Anniversary Bonus Materials, Patricia Maclachlan, Newbery Medal, Acceptance Speech, Discussion Guide. Suggested Reading List. Newbery Medal Acceptance by Patricia Maclachlan. There should be words more eloquent than thank you, words that communicate the great satisfaction I feel that the Newbery Committee has chosen Sarah, plain and tall, Harper, for the Newbery Medal. One of my children informed me rather pointedly that there are close to 100 words for snow in Eskimo, implying that I, too, ought to be able to find precise, meaningful words of my own. However, thank you seems just right for this book that is as plain and simple as thank you. And because I have never forgotten my 3rd grade teacher's rule that every story must have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I suppose a speech must follow the same rule, I would like to add my appreciation here for those people who have, in one way or another, had great influence on my beginnings as a writer. Thank you, Craig Verdon, for bringing out both the worst and the best in me and for knowing that both parts translate into words. Thank you, Jane Yolen, for luring me into the world of children's literature. Every writer should have a loving reader who has the courage to write both I love this and ugh on the same page. Thank you, Natalie Babbitt, for offering bare-boned advice and honest and true friendship. When I asked Natalie what I should say today, she replied, say anything. Just don't natter on. That is both advice and friendship. A child reader offered the same wisdom when he wrote, congratulations. I know you have to write a speech. Try, if you can, not to be boring. Last, thank you to my extended family at Harper & Row, particularly Charlotte Zolito, who has in ways both wise and sly allowed and encouraged me to pull this story out into the light where I could see it well enough to write it. I wanted to write a beautiful speech full of truths that would astonish you all, and I set about reading the writings of others, those who have won a medal and those who have not. After all, We are only a breath apart. The truths, I found, have all been told, spoken by thoughtful, articulate writers and lovers of children's literature. Why is an idea always better in your head than on paper? A small boy once asked me. Wise child. Edith Wharton, I told him, said the same thing when she wrote I Dream of an Eagle, I Give Birth to a Hummingbird. If that is the way of books, it is just as true of the writing of this speech, which is every bit as difficult to write as any book. With the fervent hope that there is not one thing wrong with a humming bird, then, that is what you'll get, a hummingbird of a speech. It has also occurred to me that it would be unseemly to write a Newbery acceptance that is longer than the book for which the award is given. My daughter, Emily, at age 5 said what is closest to what I feel now children often do when on the hottest of summer days she put on winter clothes to go out to play. Why? I asked her. It's much too warm. Because, she told me matter-of-factly, her hand on the door, wearing these clothes makes me feel joyish. A child's truth. Wearing the clothes of the Newbery makes me feel joyish, too, though I'll admit the outfit is made up of layers, many of which are well worn, some new and unfamiliar, like gold lame draped on a dime store dummy. And although those who know me well know that I am uncomfortable talking about myself, except after sodium pentothal or several tall glasses of wine, I would like to about the you of which you will roots of this story, in the process of which probably know more about me than you care to know. When I learned that I had won the Newbery, it was after lunch with friends, not my best time of day, even though my fortune cookie was the only one with a prophetic message. It said, your talents will soon be recognized. Honest, it did. I will carry it with me always so that when I am in the middle of a book or a speech, where I am always convinced that I am tedious or dull or self-conscious, I will remember that once upon a time I was talented. My best time of day as a writer not as a parent is between 5:30 and 8 in the morning, when I make what at the time seemed to me to be the most startling observations. The observations, mind you, that later as I write them become as common as the odd glass of water, the coffee dregs, the garbage of the day, those things, surprise or no surprise, that are what life and literature are made up of. The sunrise and I are close friends, we are well connected. Good word, connection, for if I feel connected to the sunrise, I am even more connected to childhood. Once when I was young, I had a dream that the sun did not rise because I had overslept. Ah, the wonderful self-centeredness that is allowed, that is necessary in childhood, suspicious in adulthood. Dare I admit that I have had the same dream as an adult? You bet I do. My daughter gave me permission when she exclaimed one day, when are we grown up anyway? When, indeed. E. L. Konigsberg, writing and celebrating children's books, Lothrop, confesses to the same thing after describing a trip to New York after winning the Newbery, but because I retain this ability to see myself as the center of the universe, I can write for children. And because the adult part of me can see how absolutely ridiculous I am when I am doing it, my writings are readable. I wonder if there really is that adult part of me, for every morning as the sun comes up I crash downstairs, first one up, to clamp myself against the kitchen sink and watch the sun come up over the hills. It does not seem ridiculous. It is serious business. At the moment that Dudley Carlson of the Newbery Committee told me of the award, I was articulate and adult, you can ask her. I was, however, at the same moment touched by a curious, childlike sense of immortality, much like one of my children who asked one day if I could please see to it that he be buried standing up, as if he might one day walk right out of the situation. When I said that I would probably die before him, he did not seem terribly perturbed. These thoughts of immortality surfaced later in the week when I was being interviewed. What would you like writ 10 on your tombstone? Asked the interviewer. I leaned forward. Do you mean I'm going to die? I asked. I think I was kidding. Definitely the gold lame part of the outfit. What I remember most, what fit best, was that as I spoke to Dudley and Liz Gordon and Charlotte Zolito, our dog, Hilly, was nosing her dish around the floor, 3 hours ahead of time as always. My son Jamie was waiting for me to continue an absurd, ongoing 19-year-old game of who can touch him last, which has no rules except that I lose and laugh about it and find myself lurking behind doors like a fool. My husband, Bob, was there where he had always been, and there was a red-breasted nuthatch on the bird feeder. I knew that if I called our oldest son, John, he would burst into tears of excitement. I did, and he did. And so did joyous Emily. And I. Thank them all, even the nuthatch who has been at the feeder ever since, for reminding me that it is the sturdy shoes that happily endure, those ground gripper truths that reassure us that with the champagne comes tuna noodle surprise for dinner. The old dog is fed or she makes your life miserable. The familiar bank teller hands you a congratulatory flower the next morning and tells you that you're overdrawn evidence of life, both the magic and the muck of it. After all, the muse whispers to me, you were a full-blown adult, a wife and mother, long before you ever became a writer. Just what is the magic, the literature, or the life from which it grows? Sarah, plain and tall, grew out of these same experiences, what my mother used to call the hero ICS of a common life. When Julius Lester praises children's literature as the literature that gives full attention to the ordinary, he echoes my parents' belief that it is the daily grace and dignity with which we survive that children most need and wish to know about in books. My parents believed in the truths of literature, and it was my mother who urged me to read a book and find out who are, for there are those of us who read or write to slip happily into the characters of those we'd like to be. It is, I believe, our way of getting to know the good and bad of us, rehearsing to be more humane, revising our lives in our books, as John Gardner wrote, so that we won't have to make the same mistakes again. My father and I played out daily scenes in the cloaks of the characters, engaging in extended plots that we changed as we wished. More rehearsal. It was a safe way to bump up against life, and exciting because my father always invited questions and disagreement. Our plots could make you cry, and I don't mean tears of joy. His enthusiasm, coupled with my mother's incredible tolerance for the eccentricities and subtleties of people, particularly children, meant that I could risk being a rascal. And I was, like the horse Jack in Sarab, plain and tall. It is the essence of my parents' acceptance reflected in the character of Anna and Caleb's father when he complains that Jack was feisty in town. Rascal, murmured Papa, smiling, because no matter what Jack did, Papa loved him. My mother told me early on about the real Sarah, who came from the coast of Maine to the prairie to become a wife and mother to a close family member. My mother remembered her fondly. Is that real? Demanded a schoolchild. Just what are the facts? This is the question most asked by children, I suppose, because part of childhood is concerned with sorting out the facts from the FIC tie-in, both truths of life. Recently in Pittsburgh, I was confronted by some heretofore unknown facts. While reading some children's comments, I saw the following. Question: what is the Newbery Medal? Answer: it is for telling the best joke. It looks like a tomato. It is a tomato. Question: who is Patricia Maclachlan? Answer: she is famous because she had a baby on the Brooklyn Bridge. I, too, am still trying to sort out facts for myself, though with little luck. I've noticed, said a friend recently, that you don't pay much attention to facts. They are not, she added, of great importance to you. I confess to this. Facts are like an oil painting which begins with a figure and soon succumbs to layers of paint so that the original is lost underneath. Facts are, for me, close to what the writer Harriet Dorr describes as memories in stones for Ibarra, Viking, when she writes that memories are like corks left out of bottles. They swell. They no longer fit. I will believe anything, fact or FIC tie-in, if it's written or told well, as Jane Yolen will tell you. She called me once to read a passage she was writing about a dragon giving birth, laying its eggs in the sand. Tell me if this works for you, she said. After she read, I was incredulous. I didn't know dragons laid eggs, I said. I thought they had live young. There was silence. Patty, she said, dragons are imaginary. Oh. It works, I muttered. So the fact of Sarah was there for years, though the book began, as books often do, when the past stepped on the heels of the present, or backward, when something now tapped something then. 2 of my children began to prepare to leave home for college, first one, then the other. But before they left, my parents took us on a trip west to the prairie, where they and I had been born. It was a gift for all of us, for the children to see a land they had never seen, to know family they had never met, to stand on the vast North Dakota farm where my father had been born in a sod house and, as Anna observes, the prairie reached out and touched the places where the sky came down. Maya Angelou said recently that when Thomas Wolfe said you can't go home again, he was right. But he was also wrong, for you can't really ever leave either. It was a startling connection from the past to open the door of the granary, the only building still stand and find a gopher filling his cheeks with grain. But mostly it was an important and poignant connection for my mother who was, because of Alzheimer's disease, beginning to lose her memory. How splendid if memories swell like corks out of a bottle. How cruel when they diminish and disappear. First there is no more present. Then there is no past. At last there are no more words. Words, 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 complained a frustrated young writer in a letter to me. Is that all writers have? Yes and no. Sarah speaks for me and my mother, for whom there are few words left, when she writes in the book, "My brother William is a fisherman, and he tells me that when he is in the middle of a fog-bound sea the water is a color for which there is no name." This is my favorite sentence in the book, and I know why. It is my attempt to say what I have always thought and only been able to say in Sarah's voice, that words are limiting, an odd thing for a writer to say. There is an entire world, complex and layered and full, behind each word or between words, that is often present but not spoken. And it is often what is left unsaid that shapes and empowers a moment, an experience, a book, or a life. Actors know this. Musicians know it, too. When I began Sarah, I wished for several things and was granted something unexpected. Most of spaces, all I wished to write my mother's story with like the prairie, with silences that could say what words could not. I began the story as a picture book, and it is clear to me that I wanted to wrap the land and the people as tightly as I could and hand the small piece of my mother's past to her in a package as perfect as Anna's sea stone, as Sarah's sea. But books, like children, grow and change, borrowing bits and pieces of the lives of others to help make them who and what they are. And in the end we are all there, my mother, my father, my husband, my children, and me. We gave my mother better than a piece of her past. We gave her the same that Anna and Caleb and Sarah and Jacob received, a family. One day when my mother still had words in her, we went for a drive in the country. We talked. Suddenly, my mother reached out to touch my arm. "Now who are you?" she asked. "I am your daughter," I said. "Ah," she said, leaning back and smiling, "then isn't it nice that I like you?" Now I hope you can see why I am enormously pleased and honored to accept this award for this book. Thank you. Sarah, Plain and Tall. By Patricia Maclachlan. No Common Core Line Discussion Guide. Before reading. 1. Create a class bulletin board or collage depict ing images of frontier life in the 1900s. Into your visual representation include pictures of houses, families, transportation, clothing, food, 215 working conditions, schooling, and so forth. Participate in a class discussion about the photos. What do you find most intriguing about this time? What might have been most challenging about living on the frontier during the 1900s? 2. Mail-order brides, or grooms, were common during this time in remote territories. Read about this practice, then discuss why it might have been common. Discussion questions. 1. Anna and Caleb's mother dies giving birth to Caleb. Describe the impact her loss has on both Anna and Caleb and on their father. Why do both Anna and Caleb feel guilty? 2. Both Caleb and Anna long for their mother. Explain how the author shows readers that Caleb and Anna miss her. Use examples from the story to support your answer. What words or phrases does the author use to make readers sympathize with Caleb and Anna? 3. Caleb says, "Papa doesn't sing anymore." What does this statement reveal about Papa? Why does Anna ask if Sarah sings? How do Anna and Caleb respond when they learn that Sarah does sing? What themes in the story does this best question address? 4. Describe the setting of the story. What was daily life like for the family? Discuss how their daily routine changes once Sarah arrives. In what way is life on the frontier different for Sarah? 5. How does Papa reveal to Anna and Caleb that he has written to Sarah? Is he hesitant about his decision? Why or why not? What response do Anna and Caleb have to his announcement? 6. Who is Sarah and how does she come to live with the family? What do Caleb and Anna think of her? Find passages in the story that illustrate their feelings. Do Caleb and Anna want her to stay? What fear do they have? How does the author illustrate their fear? Use evidence from the story to support your answers. 7. How does the author describe Sarah? Is she a likable character? Describe how she fits in so with the family. How does Caleb know that she plans to stay? Support your answers with evidence from the story. 8. The author does not reveal a great deal about Sarah's former life. What does she state explicitly about Sarah's past? What can you infer? Use evidence from the story to support your answers. 9. Imagery is when the author uses language that appeals to the senses. Sometimes to create vivid scenes, authors use similes and metaphors. Review the definition of both literary terms and find examples of each in the story. Discuss the